Hey, what's up, everybody? It is a brand new week, and we've got brand new wines. We're going to be tasting through some Pinot Noir today, and I'm really excited to introduce you to a very good friend, Dr. Pinot, and his new project, Maritana, which focuses on Pinot. So we're going to bring him in. We're going to be tasting some wine, and I've got all three of these bottles Corrivined ready to go. Just a fun little thing that I wanted to show you guys because I forgot how much I love doing this is, I don't know if you can see it, but I've chalked the name of each of the wines on the bottom of my glass with a chalk pen or chalk marker, and it works great. So,
Hey,
How are you?
good. How are you
It's
doing today?
I'm well. It's really good to see you.
Yeah, this is, I guess, the only way we get to meet based, based on social distancing and, as people like to call it, SIP.
I think you were the last, like one of the last people I saw before everybody went into hiding. So,
Really? Really?
yeah,
Wow,
because
I was
I
lucky.
I went over to the facilities in Sonoma, and I
That's
felt
right.
like being there.
Yeah,
And then right after that was kind of when we all hunkered down.
I know. I
Um,
think it was
but
only a
yes,
couple of days before.
yeah. As Indian Wine Goddess says, "Oh my God, the Godfather of Pinot." Yes, or perhaps the
Uh,
doctor. Who cares? I
the doctor's in today.
The doctor's in. If you don't associate Donald Patz with Pinot Noir and or Chardonnay, you're doing something wrong. And I love to tell the story of the very first pricey-ish Chardonnay I ever bought for myself to drink was a bottle of Patz Hall Chardonnay. So
I love
um,
that story. You
yeah,
know, we all have
mhm.
those
Yeah,
moments where you think, I really want something special now, and then that wine always sort of has a nice resonance for the forever afterwards.
yeah.
Yeah, the
But
one I'll tell you, the one I did, Ridge Zinfandel. That was the first one I bought with the idea I'm going to hold on to this. I'm not going to drink it. I'm going to see what aged wine is all about. It was a long time ago, but it was a Ridge Zinfandel.
you remember what year it was?
Oh yeah, no, I remember it all.
Uh,
19, it was a 1976 Ridge Fiddletown Zinfandel, which I don't think they even make
oh.
Fiddletown anymore, but they did for quite a number of years.
Yeah, the only fiddle town that we used to have at press was a late harvest one that they did.
Yeah,
There was a late harvest cuvee, and they never were good. I Anytime I opened one, it was like it was
the
one of the
dry.
few. Yeah, it was one of the few like aged ridge wines that I was like maybe take back seat. And then
Yeah, the ones with residual sugar are a little more problematic,
yeah,
but definitely at the time those were considered to be the best of the best in terms of Zinfandel. So it was fun to drink them in. I actually had it for a number of years.
you probably have more Napa Valley stories than anybody else I know, or at least are more willing to share them from the glory days.
Maybe.
Some of my favorite stories are the ones that you've told over the course of the past few years, and I'm super fortunate that I've gotten to know you and gotten to listen to some of those stories. So in addition to talking Pinot today, hopefully we'll weave in some
I'm
great
happy
stories.
to. Yeah, we can
Yeah,
wander around and discuss all kinds of different stuff. We don't.
because you've been in California for how long?
I moved to California in 1984.
Okay.
1984. Actually, the end of 1983, but regardless. And I worked as a wine wholesale representative for about a year, and then I started working at Flora Springs in 1985. That's where I met James Hall, and that's sort of the impetus for starting Patz Hall. And then it was, one thing after another for the next 30 years.
And then you retired.
No, actually, what I did was I sold. We all four partners sold Patz Hall in 2016.
Yeah.
I signed a contract to continue to work with them for a year, and at the end of that, we had a really, really lovely conversation where we were trying to figure out. They clearly at Saint Michel, who purchased us, we're trying to figure out exactly how they wanted the next step of my career with them to be. And I said, let's just make this easy. You're not really sure what you want to do with me. And that's fine. Why don't you just release me from my non-compete and you won't have to worry about me anymore? So they agreed to do that.
Well, that was nice.
2017, I hit the ground running. So we're going to, yeah. But,
So
and
we're gonna talk about what you've been up to the last few years, which is a lot. I
yeah,
mean,
I like to, I tell people, you sell one thing, why not start three, right? I mean,
why
uh,
not?
so the Maritana that we're going to taste today, that's been the primary thing that I've worked on. It's the largest of the projects I'm doing, which is just around 4,000 cases a year.
Mm.
Then I did a little bit of Napa Valley Cabernet under a brand called Secret Door, which Press has.
Mhm.
And that's been a fantastic experience as well. I've always loved Cabernet. People often think, though, if you're doing Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, you must hate Cabernet, right? No. Why would you hate a wine? That's really good. That just doesn't even make sense. But it's been fun to rediscover it because obviously if I worked at Flora Springs, we did Cabernet there. I also worked at Girard Winery. We did Cabernet there. So it's not something that was completely out of my comfort zone, but it was fun to go back to doing that.
I'm glad that you're back to Pinot.
The third one, just real quickly.
Oh yeah, there's
the one I'm doing. The one I'm doing with Francois Villard. So it's a white Rhone style wine based out of Alder Springs Vineyard in Mendocino, and then we also do Syrah, so Syrah and a white. And that's been a blast. Francois is crazy and fun, and we've had a great time doing it. So, and I know I've shared all of these things with you, so it's fun to kind of reflect.
Yeah, I think this has been really fun because I've actually gotten to watch the trajectory of the project basically since its
really
infancy.
You tasted the wines in barrel before we bottled anything, so yes.
Yeah.
You were on board at the very, very beginning.
Yeah, no, I feel very fortunate to have tasted these along the way, and you know, we're only tasting Pinot today, but I will speak to Secret Door, which is a wonderful wine, and I think maybe the love I feel for that is only trumped by Jody's love for that wine, because she has a very special, deep connection to that.
Yeah.
Which I love. And then yeah, the Rhone blends that you guys are doing are spectacular, and a Viognier that has light and lift, and the Syrahs are deep and complex and minerally, and certainly not maybe what we necessarily think of when we think of California Viognier and Syrah. So
well,
when you have a
French partner, it's going to turn out differently. They're not all on board with the idea of picking this stuff at 30 plus bricks or things like that. So, as you talk, especially with his friends, Francois' friends in Côte Rôtie, people like Yves Gangaloff and Yves Couleron, they're always talking about freshness in their wines, and I didn't really understand it because you try an old wine with them and they say, oh, it still has great freshness, and I thought, you must be thinking of something else than I'm thinking of, because I don't immediately think of fresh. But they're talking about a really balance, I think, more than anything else when they're saying that. So anyway, should we try some Pinot?
I would love to, and I would love for you to tell me where to start, because I don't know.
Yeah, let's start with Moonshine.
Great. So we'll start with Moonshine. I've got all three of my glasses over here.
I have one really, really big glass. That's
oh, well, there's just not enough of us drinking. And I really didn't want to open things that weren't going to be consumed, especially these wines. So I quartered them ahead of time and gave them a few minutes in glass to relax. So okay, so we'll start with the Maritana. This is the Moonshine Ranch from Sonoma County, so you guys can see it.
Yeah.
So can you talk to me a little bit about this vineyard and what this is?
It's obviously 100% Pinot Noir, and it's one of the Martinelli properties. And I was called in 2018. It was a big harvest. Everybody knew it was a big harvest, so they were getting a lot of pushback from some of their wineries saying, "I just don't think I can take all these grapes. Can you help me out?" So I got a couple of interesting calls, and of course I was saying already at this point, saying to myself, "I have more grapes than I know what to do with in 2018. I can't take any more." So I got a call from Lee Martinelli Jr. and I said, I'm happy to come over and take a look at a vineyard because I like you guys. So I went over there, walked around, and I'm thinking in my head, finally a vineyard I can, say, I'm sorry, I just don't have room. And as I was getting into the car, I did one of those Columbo moments where you're about to leave and then you turn back and go, just one more thing. And I said, what? I know where we are exactly, but what do you call this ranch? And he said Moonshine, and I realized it's one of their top single vineyard wines. He's offering me grapes from one of their best sites. How can you say no? So I said, yeah, I'll buy some grapes. But it's not a big project. It's a couple hundred cases a year. But it's interesting because it has two different clones that are interplanted row by row, alternating clone 828 and Pommard. And they are prepared to pick it separately if I ask them to. In 2018, we picked them together and co-fermented that. In 2019, they were harvested separately.
So what do you, since you did harvest them separately, what do you think the respective clones offer?
I think, you know, the Pommard always to me is, you know, it has this really distinctive kind of plummy kind of flavor, and it's really, it's delicious, and in a small amount, I think it's a great blending component. Generally speaking, I would probably not do a single vineyard, single clone designate just with Pommard. Now, the 828 is a bigger cluster clone, and I think has really beautiful aromatics and nice structure to it. And so the two work really well together, actually, with the richness of Pommard and the more structured character of the 828.
Yeah. Why, I'm curious, why did we start with this wine?
It's well, when you look at them, you can see it's the palest color. And I think it's definitely the more immediately drinkable of the three. I would really recommend that if you buy all three, this is the place to start. I think it's a really good example of what I'm trying to do, and I think it's really important that people ask me this a lot. What are the differences between what you're doing, Donald, and what we used to do at Patz Hall? And I said, well, the world doesn't need another Patz Hall. They've got one. It's a great place, and the wines are fabulous. But you know, I don't need to start that and do the exact same thing. So I explored some really interesting new things for me. In the case of Pinot Noir, a lot more whole cluster. We used about 10% usually at Patz Hall. This 2018 is 50%. Excuse me, 50% whole cluster.
Wow.
And I think that really adds the aromatic lift to the wine across the board.
You said this was harvested separately. Was it also fermented separately?
This is 2018. They were co-fermented.
Co-fermented. Okay.
2019 they were separate.
I understand. Okay.
I like the clean flavors, the length of this wine. It's delicate, but at the same time, it's not wimpy.
No.
You know, it's got great structure and power underneath, but a more feminine style, maybe.
You pulled the words right out, because as I was tasting that last sip, I was like, I got this wine. This wine, it finished. It took me a second, I think. Well, and I also, I blame the Coravin to some extent, and I love the Coravin, but sometimes it mutes things in a way that I'm like, where's the wine? Where's the wine? Where's the wine? And just that last sip, I was like, that's the wine. Yeah. So just a thing for anybody that's utilizing a Coravin, I always find is just give it a few minutes, give it some air, and I think sometimes it loosens it up. But this wine, it's got density, but it's got a viscosity to it, like a really silky light layer. It's almost like silk sheets, where they feel kind of like cold and they just kind of like brush off your skin, but you know that they're there.
That's a great description.
Yeah.
I really see it. And Pinot should be that way. Ultimately, Pinot Noir is really about aromas and textures. It's not about intensity. It's not about extraction and power and, you know, rip your lips off kinds of wines. These are sexy wines that really want to be like perfume.
Yeah. Is there a style that you're after with these wines, or are you just looking to let the vineyard show through a little bit?
I think that of course winemaking has a big impact on the resulting wines. So you're always striving for a particular style. Even when people say that they're just letting the vineyard do the talking, their choices in winemaking are creating some of that as well. But I really want I want them to each be unique. I want them to all have their own voice, rather than just be, wow, that's really good. Wow, that's really good. Wow, I can't tell the difference between those three. I want them to be, I want you to have a favorite. And it's okay if there's one that's less one of your favorites, because there's somebody else right behind you who's going to like the wine you don't. I saw this all the time, showing it around. You just sort of, really? That's your favorite? That's pretty cool. Right. No one else all day long is like that wine.
Well, it goes to show, I mean, different palates, different times of the day, you know, wine is ever changing. Yeah, you know that.
It is. And as you shake the wines up, as you go from account to account, or you have friends come over and things, and yeah, it's inevitable that the wine, and you change too as the day goes by. So your impressions are going to be different depending on the time of day.
Yeah. I mean, you know, the time of the day that you want breakfast, it doesn't feel like the time of the day where you want dessert, right? Like your palate craves different things, and feels different.
I think that's well put. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
This smells great. I'm actually really looking forward to going back to that. There is a plumminess to this wine that's just starting to poke out on the nose now.
Yeah, I think that's really the Pommard coming through.
Yeah.
That sort of plum jam character without being thick and sweet.
Mm-hmm.
There's something that reminds me of the smell of plum jam.
Where to next?
Let's do Jenkins next,
Okay.
and here we get to do something that the first year I didn't want to do, and that is buy grapes from the same vineyard that was one of the Patz Hall ones. And Jenkins had been really one of the mainstays for us for a long time. I like that it's reversed. I mean, I always feel like
you think Instagram would have figured that out by now?
Yeah, you would think
like
so.
iPhone gets it. It's not backwards when you do a selfie on iPhone. And it's not like I can do, somebody was like, use a mirror. And I was like, that's like another layer of complication that I do not need in my life.
Exactly. It doesn't matter. I mean,
no.
I think the label itself is distinctive enough so people will be able to recognize it. So.
Yeah.
But yeah, the names of the vineyards are up in the upper left-hand corner if you're looking.
Yeah. And on the back, right? Yeah.
And on the back. And it does say Sonoma County, but if you look closely, it also says Russian River. And now there's a requirement that Russian River and Sonoma County be both on labels. You can't just call it Russian River.
Why is that?
I guess because there were a bunch of growers in Sonoma who felt left out that, Russian River was such a cute place and everybody thought it was so great. Well, we're part of Sonoma too.
So they make you put Sonoma County on here, huh?
They do.
Wow.
Jenkins. So the difference between this and the Patz Hall Jenkins is totally different clones. So at Patz Hall, we were getting clone 667 and clone 777. And I signed up for a block that had just recently been released in 2018 that was entirely clone 115. Now, these numbers probably don't mean anything to the majority of wine drinkers, but they are the Dijon selections. And the 115 is the most widely planted. It's sort of a go-to clone for a lot of people because it will both produce a reasonable amount of fruit, but also quality. 667, 777 typically are a little bit less fruitful, but they produce wines that are, I think, a little more herbaceous and just sort of more earth rather than fruit. 115 is just it's a beautifully balanced and complete wine all by itself. So I wasn't uncomfortable about buying just clone 115, although given the chance I certainly would have bought some others too.
Slade Panzelas had a question I wondered to myself as I was pouring these wines, which is, what is your glass preference for your Pinots, and do they change depending on clone?
I'm doing this one for fun because it's just enormous. I could probably put a whole bottle into this.
Oh, I'm sure, yeah.
We use the Riedels at home almost exclusively just because that's what we've been buying for years. But I like some of the other stuff too. Who wouldn't want to do the Saltos? Would be fun every night, wouldn't they? If you could afford them. There you go.
I have two. Well, actually, I have three. I have two Burgundies and one Bordeaux. But the Bordeaux sort of doubles as a Pinot glass for me because they're so big. Well, they're cute. I mean, look, I've got it in a. I think it does.
Yeah.
Look how wide it's still really wide.
Yes.
And I actually find the Burgundy glass to just be a little bit too wide on the bottom for my liking, but that's just me. Right now it's doing really well though. This wine has changed so dramatically in the last 13 seconds. It's not, and I was like, again, this Corvin thing, I'm telling you, you like, it needs a minute. Like have you had this experience with it?
I don't use it a lot. So I have to say no, but I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
It's going through a very narrow area and having, nitrogen injected through it. So it's probably going to fiddle with all of the way the chemicals sort of dance together for a little while. But yeah, you need to get a little oxygen back into it, let it wake up.
Yeah.
I really like the Jenkins has been a lot of people's favorite of the three. It's sort of in between the Moonshine and the Martaella that we're going to taste after this. In terms of intensity and density, I think it just strikes a really nice pose there as a complete and delicious style of Pinot Noir.
Darker, huh?
It is darker, and one of another area where I'm doing things differently from what we used to do at Patz Hall is I'm using a lot more new barrels on this. So it's Grand Cru level winemaking, basically 80% brand new, between 75 and 80% brand new barrels every year. Yeah. And that makes a dramatic change in how Pinot stands up. I think it adds a lot of backbone to some of the stuff. And if the grapes are concentrated enough to begin with, it does not dominate that Pinot character, but it gives it this really luxurious and complex extraction kind of flavor.
You've worked with Pinot a long time. How are you making the decisions as far as oak treatment and general regimen? Is it based on what you're tasting in the vineyard? It's when you get the juice pressed. I mean, when is that happening?
If you're going to use new barrels, you kind of have to buy them well in advance.
Oh, yeah, I guess
so it's not it can't. I mean, you could, I suppose, decide at the last second, I'm not going to use them all. But if you're going to use them, you kind of have to buy. In fact, timing for placing orders for barrels is right now.
So is that just general experience, like knowing what a vineyard or a clone might give you? Or is it?
I have a fourth Pinot, which is the Larousse blend, and it potentially could include any of these if I needed to. So I can adjust the amount of new barrels based on which barrels I choose or not choose to send over to the Larousse blend. So I load them up with new barrels and then choose the barrels that I want to use for the single vineyard designate. And I can, like I said, I can yo-yo that around a little bit within reason. Mm-hmm. But I just believe in it. So, it's not like something where you have to make, this year is not going to be a big, rich year, so I don't want to use as much. I might choose that. But in most years, I would say, the wine, I know these vineyards, I know the character of the place, and it's going to be really, really good with the amount of new barrels that we choose to use.
Just a housekeeping thing, guys. Do me a favor, if you have questions, utilize that question box at the bottom. That way it can bring the questions back up and I don't have to worry about missing them. So if you guys have questions, which I hope you do, because he is a wealth of knowledge, please utilize them. We'll bring them up.
I noticed there's a question about whole cluster, and and I mentioned this a little earlier, and I'm happy to repeat it. And that is, it's one of the big differences between what we did at Patz Hall and what I'm doing. This is 50% whole cluster.
When you were getting started at Patz Hall, how many other Pinot Noir producers were in existence in California at that time?
Oh, there were a number. I mean, already William Sellium had a great reputation. Kistler was sort of below the radar because it just wasn't available in the market for the most part. People had to be on the mailing list, but they were getting good reviews. But I think, at the time in 1995 is when we started doing Pinot Noir. It was a moment where it was one of those pivot points in the wine business where there was a sense that things were going to change, and mostly because of replanting. There was an enormous amount of replanting going on because of phylloxera. So vineyards were being ripped out in certain areas that probably weren't ideal for Pinot Noir, and new vineyards were going in areas that were much better with a lot of these new clones. And we just had that feeling. Plus, we're already doing Chardonnay, so it's sort of the obvious red wine to go with that is Pinot Noir. Yeah. And it wasn't really a very difficult choice. It took us a couple of years to get to where we wanted to be in terms of the choice, the vineyards we were getting. But I haven't had to deal with that at Maritana because I already had the connections, and we just kind of stepped into some fantastic vineyards right at the very beginning.
What do you think is easier to make? Is it Pinot or Chard?
Every wine has its own sort of quirks and twists. There are days where I'm convinced Chardonnay is at least as hard to make as Pinot Noir. Yeah, I had a couple of wines last year that just, kind of didn't want to finish fermenting, and they were Chardonnay. So I think I'm not really sure one's more difficult than the other. I think they each offer interesting challenges, and it's really been fun to explore that. But I wouldn't say necessarily Chardonnay or Pinot is more difficult to make.
Is there one you prefer making over the other?
I drink red wine. Our house is a red wine house. Okay. Chardonnay is lovely, and we drink it at home too. But 4 or 5 nights a week. It's red wine.
Yeah. Have you been cooking a lot as of late?
My wife is a fantastic cook,
Oh, lucky
and she
you.
won't let me. She has too much good sense to let me fiddle around in there. Drives her crazy because then, she's like, "What have you done to my kitchen?"
What has she been making you?
She's Korean, so we eat a lot of really interesting Korean twist things where everything. Probably my favorite is her fried rice.
Oh.
Kimchi fried rice with an egg on top, and that'd probably be the meal I would select for my final meal.
Kimchi fried rice. I love
yeah.
I think I make fried rice probably 3 to 4 times a week.
Wow.
It's excessive, but it's like my favorite dish. Rice is like something I didn't really enjoy as a kid that I really grown to love recently. And it's funny, I've been the other day, and maybe you have like a hot tip on where to get some kimchi, or maybe she makes it herself. But I've been like craving kimchi, and like every day I'm like, I've got to get kimchi. It's just, where you're gonna get it.
I'll send you her favorite brand. But
good.
We typically go to Koreana Market down in Oakland and buy a lot of our Korean stuff there, and they have really fantastic vegetables as well. It's pretty amazing.
All right. Well, she's got all the good tips. She gave me that face cream that is just amazing.
Yeah.
My mom the other day, she was like, "What are you using?"
Me too, and it doesn't do as good a job as it does on you, I don't think.
It's pretty good. All right,
so
we're moving to the Martaella. Did I say?
Martaella, yeah.
Martaella.
This is a vineyard that's owned by the Bonovia people, and I've been bugging them for a couple of years to sell me some grapes, because I know that they sell a significant amount of the grapes that are grown right around their winery, just to the west of Santa Rosa. It's a fantastic spot, and Mike Sullivan has had, who's the winemaker there, has had a number of clones of Pinot that other people just don't get their hands on. So it's really fun to work with this. It's so different. The clusters, come in like micro clusters. They're hilariously small, and I swear the guys must use a vacuum on every single cluster. They come in perfect. I really looked at these grapes and tears came out of my eyes. It was so gorgeous. But this is, in 2018, I bought 3 different parcels of his vineyard, very small amounts of each, 3 different clones. Actually, 4 different clones. One part came in with 2 clones. This is clone 943 exclusively, which I can't buy from anybody else. A lot of grape growers call it the going out of business clone, because you're lucky to get more than 1.5 tons per acre anywhere. They're just microscopic and painful, but they're gorgeous, and the flavors are intense and rich and complex, and they just go on and on. Every time I smelled this wine out of barrel, it was just like, oh my God, what am I going to do? I don't want to blend this.
Yeah,
so
this is insane. This smells great. I mean, this is my favorite of these 3.
Mine
and
too.
I see that my mother is on here, probably commenting on how my skin looks today, but Mom, you would love this wine. This is like great. My mom loves Pinot. It's her favorite. So this would be right up your alley. So I'll make sure I'll get you some. This is very, very good. This is like this is like a crunchy wine. It's kind of like got a darkness to it, but then it's lifted, and then it has feels like crunchy fruit.
I couldn't have put it better myself. But every time I tried this, as I mentioned, out of barrel, it just was better than any of the other Pinots. Right from the very start, there was an intensity and a liveliness about the wine that was just really extraordinary. Interestingly enough, I got 943 again in 2019, and one of the other, I got actually 4 different clones the first year, 2 different clones this last year, and I actually like the blend better for 2019 than I do just one of the clones. So it's going to change from year to year, but it's still a single vineyard.
It's just smells spectacular. I'm looking forward to seeing how this develops. I think of the 3, the first one we tasted, so would have been the Moonshine, was probably the most accessible. the Jenkins is the one I'd lay down, and then this is the one that like I could drink now or I'd lay down. Like I think all of these could be aged, but this one is the most complex for me, and it's the one that I'm most curious about seeing down the road.
I think that this is the wine that's probably going to be the most ageable, but I doubt I'll be aging much of it because it tastes so good right now. It is just so seductive that it's hard to imagine that it won't get sucked up out of my cellar before it really hits its peak.
Yeah.
I got a
I'm
high
gonna I'm gonna throw a question up here from John Wine Fan. What is the good doctor's take on the future of Rhone varietals from Sonoma and Napa? Where are the best?
Where are the best sites? Well, I think the cooler spots are probably the best, both in Russian River and also out on the Sonoma coast. I think that the way that I like to see the white versions is to have some great acidity, and we were buying grapes from Mendocino for Terminim, and that we actually began buying Pic Cool Blanc for part of the blend because it added so much freshness and brightness and crunchy character. It's easy for Marsanne in California to become this sort of thick and oily, almost like doing a straight shot of olive oil. And that's just not what I want to drink. I mean, other people find that very dramatic and they love it, and that's cool, but it's just not what I want to drink. So we've been gassing up our Marsanne Roussanne blend with that. But I really think that cooler spots are probably better for Syrah as well as these white varieties.
I'm surprised you were able to find some peak cool. That's kind of a
my friend up at Alder Springs, man, he's got everything. Stu
That's
Bewley
crazy.
grows everything up there. I noticed that he had Falangina, and he sold, if you can believe that, I mentioned Ridge earlier. He sold Ridge Vineyards Falangina. I saw the label. It's a real thing. Can you believe it? I can't believe it. So we're walking around out in his vineyard one time, and he's telling me all these different clones. He's got 9 clones of Nebbiolo, and I look at him and I go, Stu, 9 clones of Nebbiolo. And no one, in my opinion, has ever made a great version of Nebbiolo in California. That's just my
outside
opinion.
of Italy.
Other people may differ. I'm talking about California. But I said, but you have 9 clones of Nebbiolo, but no Riesling. Now, how does that go? So I got a text message from him about 6 months later of a vineyard, and he says, we're putting your Riesling in right now. I don't think I'm going to do Riesling.
Oh, but good. I'm sure he's really glad that he planted it now.
I never said I was going to buy it. I just said, why don't you have it?
Oh, that's classic. I love it. What grape that you haven't made yet would you like to make?
Well, there's a number of things that I think would be fun to try. In fact, I did an auction lot for the Sonoma Barrel Auction a year ago. That was I call it a grape fight, where I swapped 1,000 pounds of Pinot for 1,000 pounds of Zinfandel. And the guy who normally makes Pinot is a guy named Clay Moritzen, great guy. And I'd never made Zinfandel before, so I had a chance to do Zinfandel this last year, and I think that was really fun. If I was going to do something new, that might be part of it. Zinfandel is a really fun grape to do, but of the classic grape varieties, probably Merlot, and people think they probably just shake their head when I say this, but Merlot can be great. Merlot is an amazing grape variety, and I think it would be, if there was a market there for it right now, I might think about it.
Yeah, I'd like there to be a market. I think
there should be.
There should be. It's a delicious grape. Just one that people have shied away from as of late.
I don't know why. Well, I think part of it was the movie where the guy says, "I'll do anything as long as we don't drink Merlot."
That's right.
But and that had an impact on sales.
No, it had a massive impact for sure. Did you see?
It used to be in the olden days. You say I've got all the old stories. It used to be in the olden days. If you were buying, for example, Merlot from Sterling, back when Sterling was a small winery, their Merlot was more expensive than their Cabernet.
Was it like the 70s?
Yeah.
Yeah. Rick Foreman era, huh?
Yep.
Yeah. Did you see I was drinking the Mission variety and Flame Tokay yesterday?
No, I missed that. The Mission. Did you actually like the Mission grape variety?
I thought it was good. It reminded me as somebody mentioned Valdegui, and it reminded me a little of like Valdegui or like a Gamay or something like that.
Wow.
Yeah, a little Beaujolais like.
That's
Yeah, it was
probably the best
tasty.
way to make it. It really has lost favor to the point where it's almost non-existent in California. It was almost the only grape variety grown back with the Spanish missions.
Hmm. Yeah, I'd only ever had it once that I can remember prior, and it was when Kelly White had an old bottle of Mission, and it was lovely. I mean, it was, not a serious wine, but it had all the markings of like an old Pinot Noir, and I think it's still what, the Mission that I tasted yesterday had similar markings, and to me it tasted like an old Napa Valley Pinot Noir. Like it had those concentric circles of like juicy ripe fruit in the center, a little bit of like herbaceousness, and then right around the outside you had like this like earth and mushroomy thing. So, an interesting wine, not a lot of backbone, but or acid, but kind of fun.
Yeah, it's fun to try these other grape varieties. I think it's always interesting to dip in and see what people can do with them.
These were just bottled, right? The 2018.
They were bottled. They were bottled last August.
Okay.
So they are released. They are available for sale now.
I'm sorry, just released. Yeah. We tasted the 2019s in barrel. Is that what the other day?
We did.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Those are tasty. I
Couple of
remember
new
the moonshine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All of these are again on up to bat again in 2019, as well as a couple of new single vineyard Chardonnays. So I got Ritchie Vineyard, a small amount of that, and then this Martaella, that Pinot that we're tasting, I got a tiny bit of Dijon Clone Chardonnay from them as well,
really?
Which I think is lovely.
I'd be interested to try that. Thank you for sending the shop block, because that is my favorite.
I think it's a lovely wine, and what we're talking about is the Dutton Ranch, or the only remaining piece of Dutton Ranch called Shop Block, which is literally right next to their shops now, but it wasn't a shop block when it was first planted, and everything around it has been ripped out. So this is the only remaining piece of the original plantings from Dutton Ranch, 50-year-old Chardonnay plus now, 50-plus-year-old Chardonnay vines planted in 1967, and it's so cool to be able to use old vine Chardonnay from Russian River. Is so rare. I don't even know of another one that's that old. So yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it reminded me when we tasted it of the Eggshell Bacigalupi, which has the oldest vines.
Yeah,
there is something about those old vines from Russian River that there's just something I love. So
I chose Russian River for Maritana specifically because it's my favorite part of California for these two grape varieties. And sure, the Sonoma Coast has some fantastic stuff, and Central Coast has got some fantastic stuff. It's not to say that there aren't other great places, but as doing this all by my onesie, I decided it was really important that I keep it within reach, where I could go see these things and actually have an impact rather than do all of my time in a car driving up and down California to be able to see vineyards. So Russian River is a beautiful place. I think it's a fantastic area for growing these two grape varieties, and probably would be great for Syrah and the Rhone whites as well in the cooler spots where Pinot does best.
I'll hit you with one final big question, and then if anybody else has questions, they can chime in. But who do you think has been the biggest influence on your winemaking in the past 30 years? Name a few. There's more than one. I'm sure there are.
They're all my old friends. I mean, when I first started working at Flora Springs, Ken Dice was great. And I think that those wines were really underrated for a long time. I also know Joe Cafaro fairly well, and he's been a great source of information as well. And of course, James and I worked together for 30 years, so we had an awful lot of chances to talk back and forth about James Hall, about how grapes were transmuted into fantastic wines. From afar, certainly wines like Kistler. In the day, way back when I was first getting interested, one of my favorites, believe it or not, was Acacia. Those wines were fabulous back in the 70s. And I know that you actually had some of them on your wine list at,
We did, yeah.
at Press. They were amazing wines, especially for some reason, the very first vintage, probably because they bought a lot of new barrels, was fantastic and have shown the ability for Pinot Noir to age gracefully for a long time. But frankly, when I first got interested in wines, Pinot was the last part of the wine list that I would look at. The wines, for the most part, weren't great. They just weren't great. And I think it was a lot to do with two things. I think a lot of the Pinot Noir was grown in the wrong areas. And second, the success of Cabernet suggested that those guys just make Pinot Noir exactly like Cabernet, and it doesn't work. That doesn't create a wine that smells or tastes like Pinot Noir.
Do you think that Napa Valley should still be making Pinot Noir? Do you think it's something that we should just say goodbye to and let somebody else do that?
The main part of the Napa Valley, I would say yes, but Carneros is a really interesting area, and I think deserves to have Pinot grown there. If somebody wants to, make wine from there and drink it, great. I think it's really justifiable.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was doing this seminar, or the tasting on Friday for the vintners, and in trying to find Pinot Noir in Napa Valley, there used to be like Spring Mountain made one, Burgundy Border had the Spring Mountain one, Mayacamas had a Pinot Noir, and I went through and I'm making phone calls left and right, and they're like, yeah, we got rid of it, we replanted it, we're not doing anything. I'm like, so there's there's so little of it left.
There's that schoolhouse block up on Spring Mountain, and I'm not sure who's using that, if it's even exists anymore, but that was quite old vines. And then there was another one too, and I can't think of it right now, but yeah, it's been a struggle. I think it's, you're crazy not to grow Cabernet here, frankly. I mean, if you're in the Napa Valley and you're growing something else besides Bordeaux red varietals, you're probably selling your sites short. It's probably just going to make better wine from that. So drink Pinot from some other place.
Like Sonoma County,
I like Sonoma. Sonoma's not a bad choice. Yeah.
What would be your runner-up, non-California? Where would you make Pinot right now?
Oregon. I lived in Oregon for 14 years, and
before California.
Yeah, and I love it up there, and I think that they're doing some beautiful things. It's really radically different from California wines, which I think is cool. I mean, who needs another one of the same thing? So I would probably, if things had been differently, I probably would have stayed in Oregon and been making wine up there.
Yeah, no, I love what's coming out of Oregon. I think it's really exciting, and I think that's probably one of my go-tos as of late, looking for new Pinots and Chards from up there.
Yeah.
So I think
they're doing some fantastic things.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
And it's a fun counterpoint to what we do in California with the much riper, rounder textures. They tend to get leaner, more articulated and crispy kinds of characters out of there. So it's really a fun contrast, I think.
Yeah. What do you think of the Washington wines? I'm going to be talking about those soon.
I love Washington wines. Yeah, I got a bunch of friends up and around Walla Walla too, and I think that's the place for Merlot. Frankly, I mean, the Merlots that come out of there are just crazy good. But I love Washington wines. Yeah, they're fantastic.
Yeah, I'm excited. I haven't had a lot. I know the big producers, the Andrew Wills and Cayuse, and the big names, but I've got a few coming. I think this week that I'm going to try that I'm really excited because I don't know a lot of them up there. So
you should probably get some from Gramercy, right? Have you gotten any Gramercy?
Gramercy I have had, actually. I had that actually popped into New York when I was still there. So, and that was imported by Skurnik or distributed by Skurnik. So that was one that I was familiar. I think I've got two vintners coming in. What's the Rain REYN something, Rainican or something. A few others. So I picked producers that I didn't know to be shipped.
Hopefully it turns out great.
Yeah. Well, I got some recommendations. I called some friends and I said, what do you guys recommend? And it was really interesting. It was a wide array. People had a lot of recommendations for Washington wines. And actually, if anybody's watching that has recommendations for Washington wines, send them over my way because I'm curious. That's a region I'm eager to dig into alongside Oregon. So
Fantastic. Yeah.
Well,
Thank
anyway,
you.
well, thank you for sharing some wine with me today, and always your stories, which are my favorite. I always feel like I learned something by listening to you, even if it's
You're
just
sweet.
a
That's very
fun
nice of you to
story.
say that.
And these are truly delicious. I'm excited. I actually may just pull the cork on this tonight. I'm having
You
chicken.
have my permission to do that.
Good. All right. Well, thank you.
All right. Well,
All right. Well, thanks.
good to talk with you, and
Good to
look
talk to
forward
you
to seeing
too.
you.
Thank you so much. Well, I'll see you soon.
Hope so.
Bye.
Bye-bye.